Good evening, people. How are you all? So, I'm Monalisa Joshi. I'm the founder and director of a contemporary publishing house called Chrysanthemum Chronicles. And today, I and Srimati Sen are gathered here to do a virtual book launch of our latest horror book that has come out in the month of January from my publishing house. It's called Of Nightmares and Shrieks. And it's not my publishing house, it's all your publishing house. It's for the people, it's for the writers, for the readers. So I'm just a puppet who is, being moved by the universe. So welcome Srimati, welcome to the live virtual launch today.
Thank you, Mona Lisa. Thank you so much.
And it's lovely to see you and lovely to meet you face to face, even through though virtually, but it still feels like the way.
Right. Yes. So we have an evening date together. Thanks so much for calling me for this launch.
Lovely to have you, and I'm so looking forward to talk to you about this book. And firstly, I would really like to know that what was your inspiration to write your story? I read it on Facebook, but I want you to tell the audience.
Yeah. See, the thing is, horror is actually my favorite genre. In fact, I debuted with my collection of stories on horror, and that is something I've been writing about for a very long time. So I'm very passionate about horror. This
Wonderful.
particular thing, this particular story, I'll give it away a bit of it, is about a crow. So
Hmm.
it's about a subgenre of horror that is we better known as eco horror or like natural horror. So I've used the crow as a as an antagonist over here. Now why I've used it is like during one of our evening walks, I was out walking my dog, who was known as Koi, and she spotted this bird, an injured fledgling. So I since my dog, oh hi, good evening.
Hello, good evening.
Hi Lee, welcome to the virtual launch.
Oh, thank you. Sorry I'm a bit late.
That's fine. I'm glad you came.
I'm sorry?
I'm so glad that you could join.
Oh, I'm thrilled thrilled to be here.
Wonderful. Yeah, please, Srimati, continue.
Yeah. So I was actually out for a walk with my dog when we came across this fledgling, and it was a tiny crow that was actually injured. So we could make out that it wouldn't survive the night, and it was already 8:30 p.m. that day. Since my dog is not very friendly with animals, other animals and birds, I called the guards for help. Nobody volunteered to help the bird. And that is when, this guard comes and tells me that, they have this superstition about crows. Crows are supposed to be evil, like they are a bad omen. So feeding or taking care of a crow is not appropriate for our culture, and that was actually very shocking. So that night, like I actually begged them to offer a few drops to the fledgling before it died, and he assured me that no animal, no birds would touch the crow that night. And it did happen. None of the animals, I mean the cats, we have plenty of cats over there, there are many dogs, none of them touched the fledgling that night, and next morning it found its way to the garbage. So I realized that with regard to crows, and we have other kinds of animals and birds, like we have black cats, we have spiders, we have snakes and everything. So we have this deep-rooted superstition. So that is basically this premise of my story, and so I've spoken about it in the story, like how a crow is actually killed by a woman, and then how the death is avenged. So that is in a nutshell of the story.
Wonderful. So thank you, Srimati. I'll just take a moment here to welcome Lee Nolan and Michael Kozlowski. Michael is joining all the way from New York. So good morning to all the people there. Hi, Michael. Hi, Lee.
Hello.
Can you hear me, Michael? I think he's not able to hear me. Michael, can you hear me? His screen has frozen, I think. So, Michael, can you again join back? Can you log in again? yeah, that's a wonderful story, and I think it is true that Srimati, that crows are considered as like a bad omen in our Indian society. But in a way, also I've seen that when when we do those rituals to give offerings to the dead people or ancestors, crows are fed mostly. I don't know whether Lee knows
Yes.
about this or not. Are you aware about this, Lee?
I believe so. Yeah. In Hindu mythology, is it not the crows that ferry the souls to like ferry the dead souls to? Yeah. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I did stumble across that in a little reading. Yeah. So I've always been a big fan of crows myself. Actually, my muse bird is a crow.
Yeah, in fact, there are some movies in Hollywood as well where they have shown that crows are like bad omen. They're the bringer of bad news, or they have
Right,
some sort
right.
of
Yes.
ominosity, yeah, around them. So, Michael, can you hear me? Am I audible to you?
Mm.
I think he's facing some sort of issue. So, Lee, coming to you, I would like to know that what was your inspiration behind your story? And I've read your story last night. I was reading through it. It's really interesting. So, I would like to know from you.
It was it's sort of it's very genuinely me, actually, that story, and there's a lot of factors that play into it. First of all, the pirates. My family's from Liverpool for centuries, and very famously, that's where pirates came from. It's a port city in England, and so I think I've got a little pirate in my blood. I mean, there's quite a few sailors in my family, and uh, so I've always been fascinated with pirates, and also interestingly, I grew up, at least for part of my teenage years, I grew up on a boat. My parents, we lived on a boat, or I did anyway. And so the sea and pirates and that sort of thing has always been a sort of source of fascination to me. And I don't recall exactly what led me to either hear or reread that old Blackbeard chant, "Yo ho ho," and Dead Man's Chest chant. And so I just sort of toyed with the idea of, wouldn't it be nice to sort of incorporate all those things that I really enjoy, and tie them up into a story. So that was sort of the inspiration for it.
And I've noticed in some of your other stories as well that you prefer to write mostly like devil or demon. You kind of use these elements. So I just want to know that is there any a little bit of truth in that story, or it's all like your imagination and all?
Um, I guess there's a little bit of personal experience, that's filtered through. As certainly nothing to the extent of the actual demons or anything, but I've spent some time in the Caribbean, so I'm familiar with Barbados and Bermuda, Jamaica. So I'm very much in tune with traveling across the waves in that part of the world. So um, yeah, the boat ride across would very much be a recollection of an experience I've had. The island resorts, that sort of thing. I've definitely frequented a few of those in my time. So yeah, it's the volcanic pool as well. The bathing pool. So those sort of things are definitely based in realism. Yeah.
Wonderful. And did you read any of the other stories from the book? Any particular story that you liked, Srimati? You
I have, and but, to be honest with you, it was a while ago.
okay?
But yeah, no, I did. I can't pick off the top of my head. But yes, I did. I did actually read through them, and none of them. I mean, they were all very well written, and I enjoyed them all thoroughly. I remember that. But as I said, it was quite some time ago now, and fortunately, I
I
didn't
Yeah,
have
I was
time to go
going.
back through
No,
it.
you won't believe I was going through it just for the last 3 days. I was going through it again because during the time I was reading the manuscript, it has all gone away from my mind. So I just read it again. So, Shrimati, did you like any other story from the book?
No, I actually find this, yeah, I find this very varied, very rich. So like
Hmm.
if I the thing I felt about this book is I actually once I wrote about it on Facebook, most of my friends reached out to me. So I told them if you really want to read a good collection of stories and about
Right.
ghosts, supernatural, you have a
Hmm.
very rich and varied content. So
Hmm.
each I don't have a favorite here, but I love the way people look at horror and how they interpret it.
Exactly.
So that
Yeah.
way, the book is very rich, very nice. So it's actually a good collector's item for
Hmm.
people who love this genre.
And absolutely well said. Because everybody has tried something different through their story.
Exactly.
And the best part is that I'm really, really feeling so bad that Michael is not able to join because his story is really interesting. He was inspired by Stephen King. So if you get the chance, just read his story and
Mm.
also Lee's story. Some wonderful stories. And there was this last minute entry by Medhini, if you see it, I think it's the second last
Yes,
story.
yes.
And she requested
Hmm.
me so badly. She was like, she's a very, very senior writer, quite old. So she requested me that, ma'am, I've written it and I just want you to tweak it a bit according to your taste and just go through it again, please. She requested me. So I just let it be and said, okay, I'll publish it. So it's a very, very simple language written, but the story is real. She said that those elements she has mentioned are actually true. So just go through it. You will find it very different kind of story. That how they have, they how they see monsters or like a devil, or you can say. She has written
Hmm.
that.
I
And
would like to ask you, sorry, I'm interrupting you. What was the inspiration behind you writing the story, your story? What
mine,
was your
okay.
inspiration? Yeah.
Okay, I'll just tell you how this book came to my mind. This is something very
Hmm.
interesting, and I really wanted Michael to be here. What happened is I went to my children's school, and there was this book fair by Scholastic. So I just happened to pick his book Frost, and I read it, and I reviewed it on like my social media handles, and I tagged him. And somehow he, came back to me and he said, "Okay, wow, I'm happy that you read my book. I enjoyed it." And then I did an interview and I just casually asked him, "Would you be interested if I, compile a book, an anthology of horror?" And there are some horror writers I know, and they will definitely write, I'm sure. So, would you be interested? And he said yes. So then I started thinking, what can be brought, like what can be something that's like according to his genre, because he also writes horror, and Lee was also in my mind because by the time I knew him, so I knew that he writes horror. So I was just thinking, and then this thought came to my mind. And why nightmares? Because I had a very long, episodes of suffering through nightmares. So I used to like, have those nightmares a lot, and I have also suffered sleep paralysis. So somehow I just wanted to bring that element. So that's why I wrote that this story where Lisa is the main character. She suffers through that, and finally, if you read what happens, so that's how the
Hmm.
inspiration came. And then varied tastes of stories have come from you. So all of you. So that's something that makes the book even richer.
Right, right. Thank you.
Yeah, so Lee, I want to ask you one thing here because I was having this conversation with one of the new horror writers, I would say, on my talk show. So he writes on like psycho paranormal kind of elements, like where he deals with the human psychology of like people, how they suffer nightmare, and how like ferryman or maybe the grim reaper, not the folklore, not the urban legends, because he says that this is something that every writer is exploring. So would you like agree with that, that this is something that is like more overrated and people are not writing on these, something that is very original or novel content in horror?
You see, the thing with horror is trends will swing back and forth, and through horror keeps evolving. I mean, we went from sort of gothic horror with monsters and vampires and witches, and then we moved into into the 60s, where it was things from outer space, and then into the 70s it moved into like the slasher type, and now we've progressed into sort of this sort of thing where it's very much psychological horror. So I mean, horror evolves with the times, and I think as society sort of becomes, I don't want to say sort of wiser, but as society becomes attuned to certain things, then they need other things to scare them. And the beauty of horror is no matter what your monster is, whether it's a traditional werewolf or some creeping evil, or if it's a psychological thriller or a madman, the horror in any horror book is really just a stand-in for something else, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whether it be grief or greed or the monster is always symbolic of something else, which is why I love writing horror, because it's the most honest genre there is, right? It forces you to look, I mean, to ask the question, what are you most scared of? And then it forces you to look it in the face. So
Right.
what the monster, yes, will absolutely change with the times. The horror, the fear, whatever it is, will change with the times. But I think the root causes of that fear will never change, and that's why it'll always be, it'll always be something that draws readers. I mean, whatever it is that's, we might put a different face on it, but it'll still be the same old psychological fear or inner demons that we're all dealing with.
Right. Well said. And Srimati, would you agree that Indian horror right now is getting more and more accepted as earlier, because there are many horror writers and people are actually reading them. So would you agree that this is the most read genre right now?
No, not really, because see, I find many people writing about horror, and because we haven't really done much in this genre. So here, with regard to Indian authors, I would definitely use one. I mentioned one name. That's Mr. Neil De Silva, who
Hmm.
has actually accomplished a lot in this genre. And he
Right.
has also been, spearheading a lot of, groups and everything where he's trying to pull up other writers who are writing on horror. So this is one genre I think in India which is yet to be accepted by all. See, I when I was talking to my publisher, I realized that to my agent, literary agent, I realized that people are not involved much in horror. Even publishers, they refuse to publish a book on horror because they think it's not going to bring them much money than the other genres. So horror, I think, as a genre is yet to find greater acceptance in our country.
Right. Michael, can you hear me now?
I can. I'm so sorry about that. Having major issues over here.
So wonderful to have you again. I was so worried that we have lost you. This is so great. Happy to
I,
see
I,
you
I
again.
was jumping from computer to computer trying to make this work.
Wonderful. Glad you are again here. So, welcome again. And we were just having a discussion, and I was just telling Srimati and Lee that how, our conversation led to this book, and I'm so glad that you wrote for it. And I just want to know that what was your inspiration to your story, and how was the process of, writing through it and all?
First of all, thank you so much for including me on it. I'm so happy with it. I love the way it turned out, and I'm just so glad to be a part of it. I'm not the biggest horror writer, so I've written a few horror stories, but that's not my main genre. There's horror elements in all of my books, but I wanted to do something that was straight up horror, strictly horror. And for my inspiration, I went back to, the root of it all for many people, which is Stephen King. And I remembered his story, Survivor Type, from, I think it was in Skeleton Crew. And that story always stuck with me. And it's about a man trapped on a deserted island, writing in a journal, slowly losing his mind, slowly uh, devolving into cannibalism, self-cannibalism. And it's a really wicked, gross story, very powerful. And I wanted to capture that. So I wanted to write a story that where we're directly in it, we're getting a document of this person's experience as it's happening, and kind of like that story. And I wanted to do something very visceral. So, I was watching at that time a lot of body horror, a lot of Cronenberg and John Carpenter. And I wanted to capture something like that, something that's just would stick in the reader's mind and say, "Wow, I could picture that. It's disgusting, and it's not going to go away anytime soon." So that was my inspiration for it, and I've never really written anything like that before, and I was just happy to have the opportunity to try that out.
And I remember when you sent the story, you mentioned it in your mail that I've written something very much inspired from Stephen King. It kind of turned out like that. So I mean, I went through the manuscript, but I totally forgot because it took a lot of time. I'm so sorry the book came out late. But I was again going back through the stories and I was like, oh my God, what Michael has written. I mean, how it came to his mind. Amazing.
Thank you. I mean, yeah, it was rough for me, but the whole story is mostly about guilt and how guilt can consume, and I just wanted to put that to the extreme test that this person was just trying to survive. He wanted to do what was right. He wanted to get back to his family. He just wanted to live, and he did a horrible thing in
Right.
order to do that. And I didn't want to paint him as necessarily good or evil, but just to say this is a person who made a choice, and would you have made that choice? And even if you make that choice, what is it going to do to your consciousness? And it got the better of him, and the reader has to ask the question: what is this going on in his mind? Is this his guilt, or is this a physical manifestation of that guilt, and what's real and what isn't? And so those are all elements that I was playing with.
Right. So I would just like to introduce you to two of our authors here. Srimati is also a horror writer.
Hi.
Her debut book has just come out. That's called Shadow Town. And Lee is also a best-selling author. He has written multiple books on horror and many other genres. So he's Canadian-born, but now settled in India. So very much Indian. And yeah, so Michael, yeah, Lee, I'm just coming to you. I want to ask you something, but before that, I just want to ask all of you here that another horror book has come into my mind, and there are many new horror authors now in my circle that I know. So, would you be interested to write again?
Definitely.
Sure.
Yes, for sure.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. That's a great assurance. Thank you. I might reach you soon with a mail. So yeah, so Lee, I want to ask you one thing. What kind of difference do you feel in the Indian horror writing scenario and when it goes to like West? Because I'm sure you must have read many of the books. Like Stephen King is one of the famous. I'm not very much aware about many horror authors there, so I would like to know your take on it.
Uh,
I find. Oh, sorry. Were you asking Michael or myself?
I was
Go
asking
ahead.
Lee.
Well,
I just
I
come
was
back.
just yeah. I was just going to say that I find Indian horror writing to be very on the nose, and it's very specific to um, the Indian culture. Whereas
Right.
North American or British writing or Australia, wherever else, um,
Hmm.
actually is very similar to what South Korean writing. I find the Indian writing, and so I think
Hmm.
Asian writing in general tends to lean a little bit more heavily on traditions and things that are unique
Yeah.
to that culture, rather than sort of
Hmm.
tackling, broader things like Michael was saying, guilt, for example. So
Right,
instead of
right.
taking on sort of universal horror, I find that Indian writing tends
Hmm.
to be a little bit more focused on things that are unique to India. I wrote
Hmm.
a short story not long ago about witches, and they were very much North American style witches, but I referred to them
Right.
as Dians, and I got called out quite loudly in some of the reviews of it, saying those aren't Dians. Dians don't fly on broomsticks, and and I was like, well, it's just fiction. I was trying to blend the cultures, but so I think Indian horror readers are very much rooted in sort of Indian tradition, and that's what they're looking for in their horror at this moment. I don't want to paint it all with one broad brush, but I think at the moment that's. But as Shrimandi was saying, Indian horror is just sort of getting its legs now. It's just kind of finding itself. So I'm sure we're going to see it expand vastly in
Hmm.
the future.
Right. And I've seen that you merge both the elements, like you mix the cultures, and that's how I think your story becomes even more interesting.
I do try. I do try, and sometimes it's well received, and sometimes not so much.
Right. And Srimati, did you have any experience of reading, like books, horror books from the West? Which one would you say that, like you really loved it?
I am a huge movie buff, so I have watched movies by Alfred
Horror
Hitchcock, Crow, yeah, Steven Spielberg movies. So Jaws is my favorite. So these kind of, so I'm a huge movie buff. I'm more into movies rather than reading. So horror is definitely my favorite here. So you asked Lily about psychological horror. So I'm more
Right.
into psychological horror these days because that's picking up.
Hmm. And Michael, have you also tried to write something else apart from like this story? Because you said that this is the story that kind of different that came out. And after this, have you tried something more like in this horror genre?
I did. I just had a story published recently in the horror genre that's not body horror like this. So it wasn't graphic. It was much more suspenseful and just a creepy undertone about somebody who, when he goes to sleep at night, sees a hand floating in his room, and every visit it slowly paralyzes him. A different part of his body, and uh, he feels it's slowly coming where eventually he's going to be completely paralyzed. So it's more of a psychological, and I agree that a lot of my ideas come from film. I've always been interested in movies. I have a certificate in screenwriting. So I always wanted to push toward that as well. So a lot of my writing, I feel, is very cinematic, and there's a lot of movie inspirations in my writing. So because I don't read that much horror, I read Stephen King growing up. There's some horror that I read now. There's a book, I forgot the author, Tender is the Flesh. I don't know if any of you have read that, but it's an excellent book, very gruesome. But horror is not a genre I go deep into. It's something I'm interested in. I like horror films, but not your just typical slasher, torture stuff. I like it to be a little more psychological too.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, I want to ask all of you here that I don't know whether it has been done yet or somebody if might do it in the future because I haven't read literary fiction in horror yet. So has anyone written it or has anyone of you read any of such books that is written in a style like proper literary fiction?
That's a very interesting question, actually, Mona Lisa, because we were discussing that not too long ago in a roundtable, and
Right.
I personally believe that that's the direction of horror. Um,
Hmm.
that and not necessarily. I mean, if you refer to literary fiction as highbrow and genre fiction as lowbrow,
Right.
I would make a very strong case for horror being middlebrow,
Okay.
especially when you look at authors such as Anne Rice. Um, some of her work, or Molly Tanzer is another one. But I mean, some of their work is it's poetry. It's beautiful, but it is most definitely horror. So I don't see why that's not possible.
Hmm.
Where literary you can have a literary horror. I mean, you can, and I think I'm a wee bit biased as a horror writer, but I would think that horror would lend itself to literary fiction. I think a lot more uniformly than any other genre would. So and I truly believe that might be a future for horror writing. Frankenstein is another great example.
I don't
Now
know
that I'm
if
thinking,
Yes, Michael, you were saying something.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody's read House of Leaves, which is some people compare it to like they call it like the Thomas Pynchon of horror, which is very very highbrow. It's a complicated book with footnotes and weird stylistic choices and but it's very very psychologically haunting and that blends the two really well. That was something I really enjoyed reading and something that I would like to aspire to with if I were to continue writing more horror. It's an excellent book.
That's good to know because I also want to experiment on this, like writing a horror in a proper literary fiction way, and I've been asking this to most of the horror writers I've interviewed so far on my talk show. Michael, you were also one of the guests, if you remember. So most of the writers, like I would talk here in Indian scenario because I've read them and I've talked to them. So they are all writing in the like the way we read, like it moves flows through the book and people just easily jump to the climax and then the horror jump scares and everything. If it becomes difficult, like one of the horror authors said that if it becomes difficult for them to understand, they might lose interest. That's what like our Indian audience. So would you believe that, Lee?
yeah, see, audience would be the one of the determining factors, the readership, as in any genre or any style of writing. And
Yeah.
I'm not entirely sure that literary fiction readers are all that interested in reading horror, and I'm not entirely sure that horror readers are all that interested in reading literary fiction. But I do firmly believe that the cream always rises to the surface. And if you write a good novel, whatever genre, whatever style, it will find its readership. Um, so I guess to a certain extent that would be true. There will be people who turn their nose up at it and say, "Oh, horror! I'm not going to read that." And and conversely, there'll be people who say, "I'm not going to bother with all that nonsense. I got to look up 6 words per paragraph. I don't want to read that." So, but good writing will always be good writing, and it'll always find an audience. And I believe that much like Michael said, that the deeper you can disturb your audience, the better off you're going to be as far as writing a horror. And I can't think of a better sort of stylistic choice in literary fiction to do that.
Thank you, Lou, for sharing your insight on this. And Srimati, I'll come to you. And I would like to know that, like you have said, that you have written eco horror. So I have never heard this before when you mentioned this. So exactly, like eco horror is something that you always deal with animals or birds, or is there some other, like
No, see, what I write about when I write horror, it's about something I'm passionate about. So at
okay,
that time, when you announced this book, this crow thing was top of my mind. I wanted to write about crows. I had actually just lost my father at that time, and I was trying to. And when my father was alive, we had these crows coming in every day, and my helper used to tell me, "Ki, don't feed them because they are harbinger of death." And coincidentally, Baba, my father, passed away just a few months after that. But we refused to correlate, my father's death and the crows. So even
Right.
now, the crows come to my mother feeds them. So, uh, you know, I did not know then that, when I write about crow or any other animals or birds, it falls under this subgenre. This is something I later came to know when somebody asked me why I've written about crows. So
Okay.
it's termed as natural horror or eco horror when you involve animals and birds. Yeah. So there's a name to it. Even I was not aware about it when I was writing.
Even I got to know it from you today only,
Yeah,
because
yeah, same
there are
with
so
me.
many genres and subgenres to horror. So I just thought that I should ask that what exactly is that. So it's
Yeah.
lovely to
So it's actually good to see, horror evolving. There's so many
yeah,
subgenres in horror and people
exactly.
picking it up. Yeah.
And through movies also, Michael, I would talk to you here about this. That through movies also, like we see, people are also trying the comic horror side of it. Like if we see in movies, not yet in the book I've read. So have you seen any such movie? And would you believe that it can actually be like a horror kind of thing because it's again comic?
Uh, so what? Which movies would relate to? I'm sorry, like to which horror stories? Like mine?
No, I'm just talking in general, like the movies that are like, airing through Netflix or something. Like they are, showing these movies. Comic horror genre has also, come. So I watched few movies. They were not actually like they were just, I guess, Indonesian or some Thai movie, but it was fun watching them. They had that horror element in it, and then again the comedy part. So I just
Right.
want to know this, whether it's possible that you can also write a book on that. Trying your hands in horror comedy.
I do. I would find that personally. I would find that very difficult to do. It's comedy isn't something I excel at with my writing. Um, but and I do feel like when you have I guess like the Scream movies have a lot of humor in them and horror. Uh, I tend to like my horror movies anyway, a little more serious, like Hereditary, things like that. Um, but I think humor could go a long way in giving people those roller coaster rides where it gives the viewer a break. It gives them, it takes them off guard for a minute, and then you get sucked right back into the horror. And I feel like that tends to go to a younger audience. I think is
Right.
more attracted to that type of thing. And I'm not sure. I personally think it would be very difficult to pull off in writing. Um, I don't know any books that come off the top of my head that have done that. I'm sure there are, but I wonder if it leans more like to the young adult stuff. I'm not sure if anybody else knows. I don't have any examples.
Right. Okay.
So can I
Okay.
just say something?
Yeah, yeah, Shumati.
Monalisa, in Bengali literature and even in movies, Hindi and Bollywood and Bengali movies, we have these, this
Comic
comical
horror.
ghosts.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So it's like you have, two versions of the benevolent ghost and the malevolent ghost. So
Right.
I think it's very light-hearted, and even in Bengali literature, we have a lot of stories dwelling on this. So
Hmm.
in a way, personally, I feel it's very difficult to
Difficult.
merge humor and horror. It's very difficult.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Especially in writing, I would say, because when you are showing something in a graphic way, that's kind of like more comfortable. But when it comes to
yeah.
writing, I think it becomes difficult.
Mm.
I think you'll find that most big name horror writers have a wonderful sense of humor. It may not come out through the writing, but just
Hmm.
as people. And I know that Stephen King very famously addressed it in an interview when they were discussing the sort of comic relief moments in his novels. And at the end of the interview, the interviewer said to him, "I had no idea you were such a funny man. I didn't realize you had such a great sense of humor." And Stephen very famously said, "Oh, I've got the heart of a boy." I keep it under my desk in a box, right? So I think core and as Michael said, I myself am not someone that's prolific at writing comedy by any stretch, but I know a lot of people that insist that horror and comedy go hand in hand,
Right.
and I wonder if it just might be that the extreme emotion, I mean, from the peals of laughter to the shrieks of dread,
Hmm.
and maybe just the correlation between the two is what makes it work. But
Right. Okay, so let's take a moment here and please pick the book up and just show to the audience that we are doing the virtual launch of our latest release. It came out in January of Nightmares and Shrieks from the house to Sansom Chronicles, and I thank here all the writers, Michael, Srimati, Lee. Thank you for being part of this book and traveling along. I look forward to connect more and have more stories from you. So it was lovely talking to you all. I just hope that you guys create wonderful stories and give that to world. Thank you for joining, everybody.
Thank you.
thank you very much for
Thank
having
you
me.
so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. Have a great day. Thank you, audience, for joining us today for the virtual launch of Nightmares and Shrieks. The book is available on Kindle and paperback all throughout India. Please read it and review it, and also support the Indian authors. We are writing good books. We are writing this for you, so please support. Bye, all, and please subscribe.